Good afternoon. I'm Carrie Abrams, Dean of Duke Law School. I want to extend a warm welcome to our Duke Law students, undergraduate and graduate students, faculty, staff, alumni, and community members who are joining us for this important event. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to recognize the passing of a great American jurist, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Justice Ginsburg devoted her career to promoting equality and justice for all, and her passing has brought great sadness to many of us. Let us take a few moments to sit in silence to recognize her memory. Today, we are gathered together to celebrate the launch of an extraordinary enterprise. 1 year ago, I stood in front of the Duke Law School community to announce the creation of the Center for Science and Justice. It was my hope then that the center would galvanize research that fosters and interrogates the use of science in the criminal legal system, educate a new generation of lawyers who will contribute to criminal justice reform, and create opportunities to work with community partners to use academic research to improve the lives of actual people. After just 1 year, the center has achieved far more than I would have thought possible. A center that began with a visionary faculty director, Professor Brandon Garrett, now includes a large group of researchers from fields as diverse as psychiatry, statistics, and criminology, graduate students, law students, undergraduate students, members of the Durham community, and beyond. You will hear about many of these achievements today during this celebration, but here's a preview. The center has engaged in examinations of how jurors evaluate forensic evidence, of the prevalence and impact of fines and fees in North Carolina, of the disproportionate impact of these financial burdens on Black and Latinx residents, and on the imposition of sentences of life without parole on juveniles. The center has also worked with the Durham District Attorney to examine plea bargaining practices, and Professor Garrett leads a team in Harris County, Texas, monitoring the implementation of a federal consent decree implementing bail reform. The first monitor's report shows that the jail population can be dramatically reduced without increasing crime, and that these reforms reduce racial disparities. Given the extraordinary early success of the center, I am overjoyed today to celebrate the renaming of the center as the Wilson Center for Science and Justice. Duke University alumnus Derek Wilson, through the Wilson Foundation, has generously given $5 million to the center that will enable the Wilson Center to continue and greatly expand its work. I am extraordinarily grateful to Derek and his family for their support of evidence-based reform of the criminal legal system. His energy and commitment to the center is inspirational and will enable us to sustain and grow its work over the next several years. And that's so important right now. The need for the work done by the Wilson Center has only increased over the past year. We need change that addresses systemic racial inequalities. Police shootings, horrific as they are just the tip of the iceberg. Racial bias exists throughout the criminal legal system. For example, techniques of criminal enforcement, including fines, fees, criminal debt, and driver's license suspensions, have a disproportionate burden on racial minorities and the poor. We also continue to see mistakes made in criminal cases that lead to wrongful convictions because of the misuse of forensic evidence or use of unreliable eyewitness testimony. And as our society moves increasingly to dependence on massive data sets to make predictions, including predictions about which people are likely to commit more crimes, it is extremely important to study whether the various instruments in use are valid, consistently and appropriately used, and whether they might reinforce rather than reduce bias. And we need to study the efficacy of alternatives to the criminal legal system, especially for individuals with behavioral health conditions and special needs. In each of these instances, the rigorous application of science is a critical component of success. As we engage in this important work, the involvement of students is a distinctive and critical part of the enterprise. Students, including undergraduates, graduate students, and law students, work on research, analyze data, produce impactful reports, author scholarly papers, and draft amicus briefs. The students learn and acquire important skills, and they contribute to the efforts of the center to make meaningful change. You will get to hear some of these students talk about their work today. It's now my pleasure to introduce the faculty director of the Wilson Center, Professor Brandon Garrett, who is the L. Neil Williams Jr. Professor of Law at Duke Law School. Professor Garrett is an amazingly prolific scholar, and I cannot begin to do justice to his work here. He is particularly well known for his work on wrongful convictions, corporate crime, and the death penalty. He has published 5 books and has another one on the way, and his books have been translated in China, Japan, and Taiwan. Before becoming a legal scholar, Professor Garrett practiced law in New York City, where he represented individuals who had been wrongfully convicted of crimes or victimized by police. He is known not only for his remarkable scholarly energy, but also the joy he takes in collaborating with community leaders, fellow scholars, and students. Welcome to Professor Brandon Garrett.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that introduction. And now it's my honor and my privilege to introduce our community to Derek Wilson, an alum who is already extremely well known here at Duke for his commitment to excellence and his leadership in key roles at our university. We are so grateful for the generous support of Derek Wilson through the Wilson Foundation, which has now made it possible for our center to reach a new level of engagement across Duke, here in Durham and in North Carolina, and in nationally prominent work. This could not be a more urgent time for efforts to reform our criminal system. With Derek's support and with his leadership on our advisory board, which we are forming, we will be able to work harder than ever before to make this vision a reality. We're deeply grateful for Derek's energy, his leadership to support our center's work. And Derek has kindly offered to share a few words with us today as we celebrate our new name as the Wilson Center for Science and Justice.
Thanks, Brandon. I'm very excited to be here with everybody today. I wish it would be in person as normally we'd be doing. So it's a little odd talking to a screen, I have to say. But I'm totally excited. I want to talk a little bit about my Duke experience because it's been with me my entire life. My parents went to Duke. They met in college at Duke, got engaged at Myrtle Beach. I attended my first Duke football game when I was 10 in the mid-70s. So Duke's been in my blood my entire life. So when I graduated undergrad, I've been involved with the school ever since. So whether it's Duke clubs, AAAC, boards at Duke, I've always been, there hasn't been a year where I've not been doing something at Duke. And it's this ongoing Duke engagement later in life that allowed this incredible opportunity to support the center to present itself. It was something I was not thinking about, but when I learned about what Professor Garrett was doing, what the center was doing, the work on research-driven solutions, I really had to get involved. Something I've been passionate about for a long time is breaking down barriers so people can reach their full potential. And it's really the thing I'm most passionate about. And the impact of the criminal legal system on disadvantaged communities is unnecessary and really hurts our country. And bottom line is it destroys generations of families. I want to thank you all for being here. And I want to let you know I'm committed to helping this center and the staff reach its full potential in doing what it's doing. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. William Crozier, one of the newest additions to the center.
Thank you, Derek. So at this center, we aim to do work that impacts the community, improves criminal justice, and provides an opportunity for our Duke students to learn research skills, learn the law, and make a difference. Today, we'd like to highlight some of our efforts in these goals. We're so pleased to have with us one of our closest partners, Durham District Attorney Satana Deberry, whose office we are actively working with on several projects. We will also hear from Duke political science PhD student Arvind Krishnamurthy, who is working on one of these projects with the Durham District Attorney, examining efforts to understand and reform bail in Durham. Dr. Karima Modjadidi, who worked as a postdoctoral fellow at our center for 2 years, and has just now moved on to exciting work still here in the neighborhood at RTI, will talk about her work interviewing prosecutors in Durham. Next, Leah Kang will describe how the North Carolina ACLU, and working with her team there, made use of data that we have been collecting from Alamance County Jail and used those data in an important lawsuit. Arts and Sciences undergraduate research assistant Ryan Williams will tell us about his work with those data. Finally, statistics professor Maria Tackett and her student Caroline Levinson will discuss their work on building our center's website, which displayed statewide data on paid and unpaid criminal fines and fees.
I'm Satana Deberry. I am the elected district attorney in Durham, North Carolina. We've been working with the center since I was sworn in January of 2019. Brandon Garrett and I met because I am an alum of Duke Law School. When his wife became the dean, he and I began to talk about ways in which we could collaborate. It was a bit fortuitous that she would become the dean in the same year that I was elected. And we know that prosecutors' offices often are black boxes. There's not a lot of information that comes out of them. There's not a lot of information that's gathered within them. And so Brandon and I, along with some policy experts in my office, developed a couple of projects that we could work on together to start to understand the work that we do, how we do our work, and how our work really impacts defendants and victims, and kind of the overall, and create some overall strategic vision for our policy. So we've been working together in two big ways. One is that we're doing a bond project. Brandon and the center have been scraping jail data, I think is what they call it, and trying to figure out trends over time, whether our bond policy reviews are working, how they're working, to understand the behavior of the ADAs in our office as well as the judges. And then we have been doing a plea tracking project where our ADAs, the researchers at the center, work with our ADAs to understand what pleas they're offering, what goes into that decision making. And that has been a really exciting project because we often don't have information on how we make pleas. That's not just this office, that is any prosecutor's office. And so we're trying to see if each individual ADA makes consistent pleas, as well as if our office policies generate consistent pleas from ADA to ADA.
Hi, I'm Karima Modjadidi. I began working as a postdoctoral fellow after completing a PhD even before the center first launched. One of my first projects was a growing collaboration with the Durham DA's office. We spent quite some time getting to know the DAs and understand what changes they were hoping to make in their practices. Not only did we design research programs to study and expand on that work, but we spent many hours conducting interviews with every prosecutor in the office. We are now writing up a detailed review of what we learned as we explored what plea bargaining looks like in a prosecutor's office that is undergoing a deep transition. Transparency in science is extremely important when trying to improve equality in the justice system.
Hi everyone, my name's Arvind Krishnamurthy. I'm a PhD student in political science here at Duke, and the way I got involved with the lab was because of my previous work in undergrad that dealt with the death penalty and capital punishment, and seeing some of the work that Brandon and other members of the lab had done on that. And that got me first interested in the lab, and since I've been there, I've seen a lot of shared interest between what I'm working on in my research and the kind of research that's going on in the lab in areas of racial and ethnic politics, racial justice, equity, and criminal justice reform. And one of the projects I've been working on with the lab is on analyzing the effects of a change in the pretrial detention policies here in Durham. And so through the law library, we set up a web scraper that was scraping the results of pretrial hearings to gather data across 2 years, both before and after a change in pretrial policy, in pretrial detention policy in Durham, in order to see the effects of that policy. And what we found so far in that research, one of the pieces related to that is coming out in the Wake Forest Law Review. And what we found in that work is that the amount of cash bail being set on average in these pretrial hearings has gone down since the policy was implemented, and the number of people in jail has also gone down. And we think this is really promising work, and I hope to keep working on this kind of research with the center and contribute to the Durham community and criminal justice and evidence-based research in general.
I'm Leah Kang. I work at the ACLU of North Carolina, where with a team of other attorneys, I am litigating the federal class action lawsuit challenging cash bail practices in Alamance County, where we saw disproportionate numbers of poor people and people of color being jailed after arrest for no other reason than that they were simply too poor to pay their bail. In fighting this fight, we recently won a consent preliminary injunction that has resulted in reforms to the pretrial release practices in Alamance County, and it has been incredibly important to our work to have the partnership of the center and other community partners that have helped us track the progress of our consent preliminary injunction. The center has provided incredibly important data analysis and data review that has helped us get a sense of what's happening on the ground and helped us really see the impact of the changes in Alamance County's pretrial release policies.
Hi there, my name is Ryan Williams. I'm a senior studying political science at the Trinity College of Arts and Sciences here at Duke University. I've been with the Just Science Center for a little over a year. In that time, I've learned a lot about the criminal legal system. More specifically, I've been working with Leah King at the ACLU on the Alamance Jail County Data Summary System. Basically, it's a summary and a snapshot of who comes in and who goes out of the Alamance Jail and under what pretrial conditions. It's been really gratifying to see all the work we've done so far, and I'm really excited about what's to come.
Hi, my name is Maria Tackett, and I'm an assistant professor of the practice in statistical science at Duke. One of my favorite parts of my job is working with undergraduate students on projects where they can apply the skills they've learned in the classroom to real-world applications that are not only interesting, but can also make a difference. This is one of the reasons I really enjoyed working with the center on the North Carolina Fines and Fees project while supervising undergraduate student Caroline Levinson. Through this project, she not only had the opportunity to create a brand new interactive data exploration tool, but she also presented her work to North Carolina stakeholders and at the same time continued to develop her data visualization and statistical analysis skills.
Hi, I'm Caroline Levinson, an undergraduate studying computer science and statistics. I worked with the center on unpacking a large data set regarding unpaid and paid criminal debt. The data is visualized in an interactive website, RShiny, and can be parsed county by county and over decades. It was really rewarding to present this project to a large group of people, and even more rewarding to hear that For Justice is using the website.
Hi there, my name is Allison Robertson. I'm an associate professor in psychiatry here at Duke. I'm here today to talk with, to join my colleague Melissa Larson, who's the Law Enforcement Programs Manager at the North Carolina Harm Reduction Coalition. Our group here at Duke does a range of studies at the intersection of behavioral health disorders and criminal justice involvement. And today, Melissa and I will tell you about a program called LEAD. She'll tell you about the program first, and I'll follow by describing our evaluation of that program here in North Carolina. Melissa?
Thank you, Dr. Robertson. It's great to be here today. LEAD, which is Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion, is a pre-arrest diversion program that utilizes officer discretion to divert individuals who commit low-level drug offenses or engage in sex work to sustain drug use. We're seeking to divert them from the traditional criminal justice system and into a behavioral health model of care. The LEAD team represents various stakeholders from local community-based treatment services, law enforcement, harm reduction, and judicial officials. Each of those stakeholders recognizes that addressing behavioral health needs is more effective within a community-based model than within the criminal justice system. LEAD is an alternative to arrest residing within the intercept one of the sequential intercept model. in which we're seeking to divert the individual from entering the criminal justice system at all. LEAD also utilizes interventions, a warm handoff from an officer to a designated case manager, the use of peer support in the field from individuals who have lived experience, a range of harm reduction services such as access to syringe exchange, and linkage to care to appropriate treatment and recovery-based services within the community. LEAD rests within a harm reduction framework and foundation, and basically we're saying abstinence is not required, compliance is not required to be engaged in these services. We want to meet people where they are. If they're seeking housing, we go that route. If they're seeking food, we go that route. LEAD started in North Carolina in the fall of 2016 in Fayetteville. It's since been implemented in agencies located within New Hanover County, Iredell County, Haywood County, and Catawba County. There are several other communities exploring implementation of the program. Because this is a new concept nationally and also within the state of North Carolina, our agencies frequently ask for evidence that the program works. We have two primary goals. One is to connect people with problematic drug use to harm reduction and treatment services, and the other is to reduce their engagement within the criminal justice system.
Thanks, Melissa. So I'll just give a quick overview of an exciting 3-year study that we are undertaking here at Duke in partnership with North Carolina Harm Reduction Coalition. We have a 4-site evaluation of LEAD programs around North Carolina. We have 2 primary components and objectives of that study. One is to understand access to services for program participants and the program's effects on potentially reducing recidivism. And we're also interested in studying successes and challenges in implementing and sustaining these programs. For a first part of the evaluation, we are collecting and analyzing a range of administrative data that are coming from our partnering police departments for arrest and jail rates among program participants. We've got administrative records from the managed care organization that is funding behavioral health treatment services. So we've got service utilization data, and we've got case management data, as well as a lot of rich narrative data coming from peer support specialists and information that's shared among the LEAD teams during case staffings. We will analyze those data looking both before somebody's begun involvement with the LEAD program and then following to see how rates of access to and utilization of treatment services changes and potentially the extent to which there are reductions in new engagement with the criminal justice system. We're also conducting a range of interviews, surveys, and focus groups to understand the challenges to implementing and sustaining these programs. We're conducting surveys with rich, qualitative, open-ended responses and a lot of structured content also with LEAD participants to understand their experiences with the program, things that work well, ways that things might be better. We're conducting a series of stakeholder interviews with people that are involved in programming and carrying out services. And we're also conducting focus groups with police officers that make referrals to the LEAD program. And one of the other things that I'd like to add that we also aim to do is to assess racial equity concerns and considerations in the program. And that could be ways in which programs might improve on working toward racial equity in the services that are provided, and also finding new opportunities for tracking data in their programming to understand where there are concerns about racial equity in referral and engagement in the program and trying to improve on those. And now I think I'll turn it over to Tom Maher, who's the executive director of the center.
Good afternoon. I'm Tom Maher. I'm the executive director of the Wilson Center, and it's my pleasure to introduce our keynote roundtable. This roundtable reflects what the Wilson Center is about. A very human story of injustice and the ability of faculty and students to work to try to address that injustice. More than 30 years ago, Joe Bryan was convicted in Texas of murdering his wife. The conviction rested in large part on blood pattern analysis that has been shown to be unscientific and not a reliable basis for a conviction. Mr. Bryan's case was covered in depth by Pamela Koloff, an award-winning journalist currently writing for ProPublica and the New York Times. Ms. Koloff has investigated and written stories about wrongful convictions. In 2018, Ms. Koloff began publishing a series of articles about Mr. Bryan's case. And we are very fortunate to have both Mr. Bryan and Ms. Koloff join us for this discussion. Duke Law School became involved through an amicus brief filed in 2019 in the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals. The brief dealt with the unreliability of the blood pattern analysis offered at trial. The brief was a product of the amicus lab class co-taught by Professor Garrett and included work by 4 law students. One of those students is here with us today, Sarah Champion. Although Mr. Bryan has not yet been exonerated, he has been paroled. I will now turn this over to Professor Garrett to moderate a conversation with our panel.
Well, thank you all so much for joining us. And I wanted to start with you, Pam, and then turn to Joe and to Sarah. Maybe you could start our conversation off by talking to us about how you first learned of Joe's case and what drew you to first report on it.
I first learned of Joe's case from his one of his appellate attorneys in 2017, and I was immediately intrigued, of course, by the facts of the case. But I had been looking for some time for a story that would explain the personal toll of junk forensic science as a way of getting sort of the average reader who might not have thought a lot about these issues before to care and to become engaged. And Joe's case on its face seemed so bizarre. He had such an upstanding life and reputation, was so beloved by everyone in his community, had a beautiful marriage. And so there were many questions about how it was that he had come to be convicted of this crime. And I'll just add the Texas Forensic Science Commission, which was doing some terrific work on these issues around the time that I started looking into Joe's case, took up the case as one to look into. And they did tremendous work on this as well.
Great, and turning to you. And by the way, happy birthday. We're celebrating our center, and also we can celebrate your birthday in this way. So you knew all along, of course, that the case against you was wrong from day one, back in 1985. Could you talk to us about what that was like back then when you experienced this horrible personal tragedy, and in coping with that had also to cope with being charged and tried for something which you knew was wrong?
Well, it's not easy to deal with even today. One day everything is fine in your life, you're happily married, you love your job, you're respected in your professional area in your community, and the next day when your wife has been killed through the dregs of a coffee pot, everything that you work for and dream for is gone. Your most significant other is gone. And then, shock of all shocks, I was arrested for Mickey's murder. Told him from the very beginning I did not do it. That's not what they wanted to hear. They wanted to convict someone, and they did what they had to do to convict me through dishonest approaches, dishonest investigation. Small town America likes to believe in the local policing agencies. They would like to think that people are going to tell them the truth. And when you have a policing agency that, in my opinion, is not honest, and they put you out there and do a character assassination and basically frame you for a murder you didn't do, there's really not a lot you can do about it, as I found out, because we've been through 2 trials, tremendous investigative work by Pam and attorneys and the Texas Science Commission. They're not willing to admit they were wrong. I don't know if it's a professional item in this to where, you know, they're saying, you know, well, you were convicted by 2 courts, you know, you got to be guilty. But what they failed to tell you in that every bit of the evidence used against you was bogus. There's no blood on the flashlight, no semen on the underwear. And through multiple DNA testings, we have proved that. In fact, they even proved that neither Mickey nor my DNA is on the flashlight. And it was supposed to be our flashlight. And if it had been our flashlight, our DNA would have been on it, because we'd had that flashlight about 10 years. So when you sit back and look at everything that Pam did in her investigation and what the Innocence Project attorneys did and what we proved in the DNA testing labs, there's no doubt that I'm innocent. And then you get to, well, who did it? We can't prove that. We think we know who did it, but we don't have any DNA evidence that he did. But the fact that he committed suicide and admitted to his wife that he was there at our home the night Mickey was killed, what else can you believe? Particularly when he's convicted of killing a high school student 3 or 4 months earlier than that from the same area. So law students who are listening, you're taking justice. You're not taking conviction. You're taking justice. So look for the truth. Be big enough to admit that you've made a mistake if you have made a mistake. But look for the truth and look for justice. And that's what any law school in the United States stands for, is justice. And when a district attorney or a judge presides over a case and they have the facts that we presented to them and they still say I'm guilty, there's something seriously wrong.
Well, Joe, let me introduce you to a law student. Sarah Champion is here with us. She's a third-year law student, as Tom said, and worked on the amicus brief in your case. Could you tell us a little bit about the work that you did
Yes.
on behalf of
Hi, Sarah.
Researchers and scientists?
There. So I researched recent studies in blood spatter analysis, as well as current standards for blood stain analyst training. And so researchers are now looking into topics like the role of fluid dynamics and blood stain patterns, and they're evaluating the accuracy of our methods for measuring droplet distance from the source. And the goal of the amicus lab that Professor Garrett led was to take the scientific information and then present it to the court, so that the bloodstain evidence presented at Mr. Bryan's trials could now be reviewed in the context of the knowledge that we have today.
And I want to turn back to you, Pam. And Joe also talked about just the way that as the DNA evidence, as the Texas Forensic Science Commission issued its rulings, every step of the way, the state continued to fight to uphold this conviction. And what do you think explains, based on your investigation, your reporting, and your work with this case over these years, why that has been so, why the state has continued to push this as its theory has fallen by the wayside?
And completely apart. Well, I think Joe's case is especially illuminating for this question, because in some cases where a DA's office is fighting what seems to be clearly exculpatory evidence or innocence claim, you still have stakeholders from the original prosecution in the office often. And so they're trying to protect their reputations and so on. What's so interesting about Joe's case is that was not true here. And what I think this had to do with is the very culture of DA's offices that really are not geared toward any sort of re-examination or what is the word I'm looking for? Sort of a refusal to really look at mistakes that they might have made and a willingness to correct them. Now, obviously that's not true of all DA's offices. There's been some incredible work coming out of conviction integrity units in recent years. But in certain places, and I would include Bosque County in that, where Joe's from, there was just this very entrenched culture that I think was a big struggle.
Great. And sticking with you, Pam, what role do you think that the changing science played in Joe's case, and finally shedding light on what went wrong in Joe's final release last year?
So I think it played a hugely important role. There had been incredible reporting done over the years by Leon Smith, who is a local reporter in the area. Jessie Freud did so much in Joe's case, and I don't know that Joe would be out without her today. But I think one of the key components here was sort of old bad science being put into the sunshine, put into the sunlight, and held up to the standards of today. And one of the things I did in the course of my reporting was I took a 40-hour class in bloodstain pattern analysis. So I had the same exact training as the quote-unquote expert who testified against Joe all those years ago. And one of the things that was so illuminating in that was seeing that all of the very forbidding jargon that I had heard in his testimony and from so many, again, of these quote-unquote experts, I realized it didn't mean much of anything, and it certainly wasn't grounded in science, but it had scared me, and I think can scare attorneys and journalists away from asking harder questions. So I think looking back at that in present day was very illuminating, and it didn't stand up. One of the most interesting things about this case is that even by the standards of 1985 bloodstain pattern analysis, the expert did not adhere to those standards.
Yes, and turning to you, Sarah, what surprised you about the certainty with which this expert expressed conclusions about the blood pattern evidence as you were reading about what the research was then and what the research is now about these blood patterns?
Right, so blood pattern analysis has been used in as forensic evidence for decades, but I think Mr. Bryan's case is a very clear example of an analyst really overstating the conclusions that it's possible to draw from bloodstain patterns. So for instance, the analyst in the case, Mr. Thorman, testified that the firearm was held within 46 inches of the victim, that there was a flashlight that was held within inches of the firearm, and even that the fan in the room was on for 3 minutes after the shooting. And none of these conclusions are supported by the current state of scientific research on blood spatter analysis. They're all far too specific. So what we know now is that while there are solid theories behind blood pattern analysis, no analyst would really be able to say something that definite in front of a jury.
Thank you so much. Turning back to you, Joe, how did you first learn about Pam's reporting on your case, and what role do you think it played in raising awareness about your case, about the problems with the science that Pam and Sarah were just talking about?
Jessie Freud, one of the Innocence Project attorneys, came to see me at the Huntsville unit where I was imprisoned and told me that they had contacted Pam, wanted to do investigative work. Would I agree with it? Yes, I would. We already had some initial DNA results back, and we knew there was no blood there. So I agreed to see Pam. She came to see me, and she is very thorough, holds nothing back, totally honest with you, and no trick questions, is up front about everything. And then she started digging in investigatively for us, and she just did miraculous work. And with a determination like she has, looking for justice and looking for the blood splatter evidence. And the fact that she even took the class so she'd have a better understanding of it, so she could report better about the results, was amazing. And I think her determination to find the truth in all this and to find the correct justice, she put enough pressure on politics, if you want to call it that, or government agencies, to where they had to stand up and look at it. And I think that her actions were vital in helping me being paroled from prison, which I'm very thankful for. She's kept up with me since I've been out. If there's anything new going on, we talk and we discuss it. Again, there's no secrets. She told me from the beginning she expected me to be totally honest with her. And I was, and I realized that anything that I said, she had to double check. Like if I told her one thing, she had to prove it twice. And even though I don't like that personally, I understand it because of the 2 convictions I've had and everything that had happened. So in order for me to be credible, I had to reprove everything I said was the truth. And it worked. Of course, all along I knew I didn't do it. So I sleep real fine at night.
Thank you, Joe. Turning to you, Pam. Beyond this case, just in general, how do you see your role as a journalist when you come across injustice in cases like Joe's and in the world? What is your role as a journalist in the criminal system that we have and the criminal system that we could have?
That's a great question. I think I revise the answer to that probably every day, but one is to shine a light on things in the same way that your amicus brief did, which we'll talk about, I know, but I think allowing people to know, first of all, raising awareness among the public. I mean, Joe had been in prison for 30 plus years when this reporting began. Reminding people he's still there, this injustice still happened. And more importantly, I think it's providing the context and sort of the nuances of a case that often are completely lost in the courtroom. And it's just a matter of, it's not even the attorney's fault necessarily, it's just the rules of evidence are very different than what I'm allowed to write in a story. And so I can tell Joe's whole story. And I think that in this way, the law and journalism can be very complementary of each other. There was so much amazing legal work that Jesse had done, and I was able to build upon that by explaining who Joe is. You can see the moment you talk to him who he is, but explaining to people in print who he is, what his life was about, and didn't make any sense.
Turning back to you, Sarah, one more time. We've talked about the media, the public, the role of journalists and lawyers. How about the judges? Why do you think courts have been so open to allowing in forensic evidence that doesn't have strong scientific underpinnings?
So blood spatter analysis isn't entirely junk science, but it's also not ironclad proof of the way events at a crime scene played out. And since it's used often to reconstruct how the crime occurred, it can seem like very compelling, a very dramatic narrative tool for illustrating that specific act of violence that is the cause for the court's presence. And the way it's presented in court also has a huge impact on the way it's received by judges and by juries, because police departments often work with specific analysts in their area. Many analysts are law enforcement personnel that have also obtained the certification and undergone this training. And this can lend the testimony a kind of authority, even if the analyst is making statements that science can't really back up.
Yeah, and turning back to you, Joe, I know your trials were some time ago, but what was it like there watching this officer give this testimony? Did it seem convincing to you? Were you thinking, wow, if I was on that jury, kind of sounds like science? Or were you just sitting there steaming thinking, this is nonsense? What was your perception of this expert evidence from the police officer?
Well, you have to place yourself at that time in history in small town America. You want to believe policing authority. Anything that's connected to authority, particularly in such a horrible crime as this, where you have a so-called expert come in to say something, you have a tendency to want to believe it. And I'm thinking, I can't believe this guy's saying that. They didn't. I don't have any blood on me. At the time, they're making all these allegations about distances and where Mickey was in the bed and where the shooter was. And I'm thinking, how can they possibly know that unless they were there or they talked to somebody who was? So it's easy for me to say the 8 parts of speech, but if I change the meaning up of one of the words a little bit and I say it's something else and it puts doubt there, when you put that doubt there, then people want to believe the expert. Because that's the person who's supposed to know what they're talking about. And I think too many times we want to rely on someone else to make tough decisions for us. And it's not always the best way to do it. The main thing is you've got to be honest and truthful. And sometimes the truth hurts. And it's not popular.
And turning to you, Pam, as you took the course in blood spatter evidence, you came to learn how little training this expert had. What was it like for you to kind of get into the world of blood pattern evidence and realize that there wasn't a lot of there?
It was, I'm sorry to say, it was what I had suspected was true from watching some bloodstain pattern analysis testimony in a previous trial, which is part of what piqued my interest. And I think that realization, I was actually excited that I would be able to show that. One of the things that was so troubling about my class was, and this picks up on a thread that Sarah mentioned, we were instructed after 4 days to reconstruct a crime scene using just blood spatter. Think about all the things that are at a crime scene. And this is where the problem starts. I personally think, my take on this after looking at this for a long time, is that blood spatter is an incredibly useful investigative tool that can maybe lead you in different directions, and that's fine. But when you get into the act of reconstructing the crime and then sitting in front of a jury and a judge and saying, this is how this crime happened, and I can prove it because I have this special expertise in these patterns and I can understand this, you can't, but let me explain this to you. And then you have judges who are not scientifically literate, you have juries who are watching CSI, and it's resulting in wrongful convictions.
What was your reaction? I can tell you, Sarah and I and the students were kind of blown off our chairs when we were reading the material and realized that, wait a minute, all along, it's not clear that they ever tested to be clear that whatever the droplets were on this flashlight, that they were blood. Like, to have a blood spatter, blood pattern, you first need to know, you would think, that there was blood on the object.
That's exactly right. There was just basic police work that hadn't happened. And as I know you've seen so often in the work that you do, tunnel vision began on day one, and everything proceeded from that. It wasn't an investigation so much as confirming wrong assumptions from the very beginning.
And what do you think, I'm just talking to Sarah about this, that judges didn't step in, maybe not the trial judge, maybe there was tunnel vision and everyone in the community wanted this crime behind them. But there were an awful lot of decades in the years since when we have learned more about the limits of this type of evidence, and courts have been more concerned about poor use of science. How about the judges, the appellate judges, the habeas judges?
That's a fantastic question. I can tell you that in Joe's case, after a lengthy and revelatory evidentiary hearing in which I literally was gasping every hour at what was being presented, and I knew the case well, the judge literally took the state's findings of fact, signed them, and sent them to the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals. So there's a lack of rigor, there's a lack of willingness to look into some of these problems. I wonder sometimes if it's complacency or if it's people being afraid to open what is clearly a Pandora's box. If you really look at Joe's case, you'd have to undo some other cases as well.
Can you tell us a little bit about some of the evidence that was put on at the hearing?
Oh my goodness, it was very dramatic. Probably the most dramatic thing was an affidavit from Robert Thorman, who is the expert bloodstain pattern analyst, who said I was wrong. And that was so powerful. He didn't appear in court, but his affidavit, when that was read by Shelley Rossi, who is a bloodstain pattern analyst who did some terrific post-conviction work on Joe's case, that was chilling. And also tragic. We're sitting there decades later, and the truth is finally coming out. And then, as we've seen, even that is not enough.
Turning back to you, Joe. Did you feel some vindication, at least at the time, when the Texas Forensic Science Commission stepped in and when they issued their findings, including based on new experts looking at the evidence, that the evidence was so terribly flawed?
Well, I felt vindicated all along because I knew I didn't do it. But when they proved what they proved and did not support Mr. Norman's opinion in any aspect, that further verified the fact that, hey, look, I've been telling y'all the truth all these years and nobody wanted to hear me or believe me. Now all of a sudden I'm okay and you're believing it. And that's wonderful. And I've never shut up from day one about my innocence, and I still hadn't shut up. I don't intend to. I know that sounds, I'm 80 years old. I still have a life. I'm still concerned about my reputation. I don't like injustice. I never did. You can talk to any of the students where I was a high school principal or teacher or anything. You will never find a student who said that I was unfair or unjust about anything I did. That's the way we grew up. My parents told us, you are what you say and what you do.
Is this the first time that you've talked in front of a big audience about what happened?
No, it's not.
Yeah.
It may seem like it is, but it's not.
Well, we're grateful to you for...
if I could get a big drum and bang on it and yell and scream and shout, I could even do that if that would help us.
Well, it can't be easy for you to talk about. I want to ask about something which also probably isn't easy for you to talk about, but what was it like knowing that COVID was coming to prisons in Texas, including the one where you were in? You hadn't been released yet.
Well, to begin with, TDC has an awesome responsibility. And it's easy to throw rocks at something you don't like or don't approve of. But based on what little I know that they've done, of course, they got me out before they started locking the units down, and I greatly appreciate that. But I've heard from friends in prison, and they've been locked down and they've been tested. And what little I understand, TDC has done everything they possibly can to keep everybody safe and to provide proper testing. And you can't do any more than that. I'm thankful to not be there.
I also wanted to ask you about whether you heard about the work that Duke Law students like Sarah did in your case, and whether you thought that made some kind of a difference, or whether at least gave you some additional sense of indication to know that leading scientists, a whole large group of them, had signed on to this statement that there would be problems with the science in the case.
Well, no one wants their case to be a guideline or an example for future improvements. But I have to accept the fact that that's true in my case. And if it helps just one person, then it's been worth it. Because you can't look back and have hate in your heart and still have love in your heart for your life. So you have to make choices on how you're going to deal with it. My choice is Jesus is my Savior, and I'm going to ask him what he wants me to do. I'm going to do what he says. and he's going to tell me justice and truth every time. So if what I've been through helps you one person or 50,000 people, then thank you, Jesus, for that.
I hope it does. I wanted to ask you the same, Pam. Do you think that the brief signed by these different statisticians, forensic scientists, law professors, this experts brief played any role, despite the fact that, as you mentioned, the Texas courts didn't grant any relief?
I have to think that it did. One of the most, well, there are many important things about the amicus brief. One is that I think it stands as an important record on its own, describing, excuse me, the limitations of bloodstain pattern analysis and what is appropriate for an expert to say in court. And that is so important in and of itself. It also let the world know that people cared about this case and cared about the issues underlying this case that affects so many others. And I think it put the court on notice that this was a very important case. And so we'll never know all the backroom machinations. I can tell you that the court's makeup right now, no matter what the facts were that were presented, it was going to be tough. This is an extremely conservative court, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals right now. If it had been several years ago, I think this could have had a different outcome. I think they would have really thought about what you all wrote even more deeply. But I hope that it had a role in the parole decision, which was changed Joe's life.
I wanted to ask you a bigger question, ask Joe too next, but starting with you, Pam, what do you think it'll take for law enforcement to stop relying on this type of junk science to support prosecutions? I mean, there was certainly no consequence in this case. Joe finally obtained his release, but there was no admonition. We have the statement from the Texas Forensic Science Commission, but that doesn't necessarily do anything to hold people accountable for introducing this type of evidence. There's no new rule for judges. What will it take?
I'm sorry to say, I think it's going to take a lot of things. I think we need to look at qualified immunity so that there are consequences for these kinds of actions. I think it's going to take educating judges, district attorneys, defense attorneys in the difference between real science and junk science. And I think most importantly, it's going to take a culture shift. And I think that's what we're seeing around the country, that people are demanding on all sorts of fronts. But for as long as district attorneys' offices and law enforcement agencies are rewarded by, the bad guys they're locking up, rather than serving justice to their community, I think we're going to still see this kind of activity.
What do you think, Joe? There's hopefully your case will or journalism like Pam's important coverage, or what do you think it will take to put an end to this kind of made up, seeming science in the courtrooms?
Well, I like the way you said that too, made up seeming science. Investigation goes the same way. Until there is a law that anyone who is involved in the prosecution of anybody is held accountable for their investigation and for their decisions, it's going to go on just like it is. When you have it now where police officers, DAs, judges, all these people are immune from prosecution, that gives them too much discretion to let personal differences and preferences enter into the judicial system without any justification. It's just they want to win. And until we can hold them actually accountable for what they do, this same stuff is going to go on. That's just, that's my opinion. So when you have a science center and a justice center, like the Wilson Center there in North Carolina, hopefully you can instill in the students, their law students, justice first. Be truthful. You do what's fair, but be accountable for what you say. Do not be ashamed or to make up stories to justify your wrongdoings.
That's what we hope. That's what we hope to do. That's what we're here for.
Yes.
was hoping you could, as our conversation winds down, talk about what it's been like since you've been free. What it's been like to return to the community and to rebuild your life.
Well, after 34 years, it's overwhelming. Technology is 50,000 light years ahead of me. If you see a subway train running on the tracks and someone running by it, that's me running, trying to catch up with what's going on. Because I'm lost as a goose on technology. But in the iPhone, I'm amazed at what it can do. And here I'm on the iPad, with y'all in the Zoom program. Who would have thought this 35 years ago? So there's so much you've got to catch up on, and just going to the grocery store and seeing all the products that you can buy. And then here I am, 80 years old, and thankfully I still have my mind and I still have good movement. So I'm really blessed there. You can't dwell on the past. You got to look to the future and do the best you can from that point. And you being angry at the world's going to solve nothing. It's just going to make me sick. But people like you and your law school and the Texas Innocence Project and Jesse and Walter and Leon and Pam are vital to what justice is all about. And as long as we have people who care enough to be compassionate and understanding and do a proper investigation, things are not going to get any better. But it's wonderful to be out. My family was here. We've celebrated my birthday, very emotional time, but wonderful.
Happy birthday. Well, thank you for sharing your birthday with all of us. It really means an awful lot to us, and to finally,
that's me too.
to finally meet you after we were working on that brief last year for Sarah.
Yes, I thank y'all so much for your work on that. I have received hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of letters and mail from people all over the world about my case. And then when I got the notification about the amicus brief that y'all did, I just sat down and wept.
Well, I know there are folks watching around the world and who RSVP'd for our program today, and we hope that others watch it on video who can't make it today live. And we just have a minute left. I was hoping you could talk to us about, what next in terms of like using Joe's case to bring these problems to light, to find other ways, other stories that can illuminate how there can be a rush to judgment, even where science or pseudoscience is concerned. What is your thought as a journalist on how to raise public awareness to the next level?
Well, one thought is that my work on this, the amicus brief that you all did, so incredible, and so many other things that have come out of this have become resources for attorneys. I heard from so many attorneys after the story was published, I'm sure you have with the amicus brief, who were looking for guidance in cases that they had and weren't sure what to do, defense attorneys. And I think sort of building this body of knowledge, making people more scientifically literate, and also making them know not to be intimidated by the jargon and all of the trappings of quote unquote science when that's not what it is. And I think the more we can talk about this, I would love to see, for example, CSI replaced on reruns with sort of the anti-CSI show where people are freed after DNA evidence proves that the junk science that sent them there was wrong. That's probably dreaming too big, but I think raising awareness is just so, so important. And just one last thing, I just wanted to say thank you so much for the incredible work that you all have done, which was so validating to me as well. So thank you.
Well, thank you all. Really want to especially thank you, Joe, for taking the time to join us and for sharing your story with our community. And I want to thank you, Pam, for all the work that you do and for joining us here today. And to Sarah for your work as a second-year law student, taking on new research, new technology, this blood pattern, non-science that you had to learn for the first time along with your classmates. Thank you all for joining us on this panel. It was a pleasure for me to be able to speak with you all and to allow you to exchange your stories. We really appreciate all of you who've joined us today live and who are watching this program later. We couldn't be more proud of the work of our faculty, our researchers, and our students to address failings in our system of justice. And we couldn't be more grateful again to Derek Wilson. And we celebrate our new name, the Wilson Center for Science and Justice today. We are so grateful to writer and poet Jaki Shelton Green for joining us to conclude with a call to action, sharing her work in closing. Jaki Green is our North Carolina Poet Laureate, recipient of the North Carolina Award, among her many awards in North Carolina and beyond. She's also an instructor at our Duke Center for Documentary Studies. Thank you so much for joining us today and for closing this remarkable event.
Thank you so much for having me. I feel strongly as a community activist, a cultural activist, and as a poet who holds space for justice and all of the possibilities of equity in our system. I wrote this poem, Oh My Brother, several years ago when I was invited by an organization in New York City of poets who were creating a space for poetry of lamentation. Poetry that was a signal to families across the United States that we stood with them, as nameless as we might be, as faceless as we might be, as they held space in grieving and sorrow for the loss of their loved ones at the hands of police. The process for writing this poem was once you agreed to buy in, and I immediately decided I was in, was that you would be contacted within 24 to 48 hours to submit your poetry, to upload a poem. Within 24 to 48 hours, you would be guaranteed that you would have your person. As I was walking through my house after I hung up the telephone, I was nearly knocked to my feet, realizing that I was waiting for someone to die. That statistics in our country at that particular time could predict that within 24 hours, someone was going to die. Within 24 hours or less than 24 hours, my person arrived. My person arrived to me within an email that was basically a connection or a link to a local TV station somewhere in Detroit that I mean in Michigan, I'd never heard of. And that link was less than 30 seconds. Unidentified African-American male shot down on Route 64. More news tonight on the 6 o'clock news. That was it. No name, nothing. Oh, my brother. Oh, my brother, my brother. I will weep for you whenever the sun rises or falls. Your shadow has been betrayed. The red of the bullet bleeds and covers every breath of all the life you've lived. Oh, my brother, my brother. I will stand here and wail your name. Hold the bullet inside my mouth that cannot stop convulsing with pain. I will learn to swallow the spasms in your screams. I am calling my brothers and my sisters to the ground beside this river, where your blood is born, where your blood runs until it is clear, until it is red, spent, and it stands up like the wind and speaks into a light we cannot name. Oh, my brother, my brother. I beat my chest, pierce my hands, run back and forth naked in rain, trying to swallow this red of a bullet that knew your name. Cracked open your smile, stole your hair. Oh, my brother, I weep for all I do not know about you. I weep with the bullet that is lodged in my throat, whispering its own requiem. The red of the bullet cries out your name. The bullet whispers to me about the flowers that heard the sound. The bullet whispers to me about the sorcery of forgiveness. The bullet whispers to me about black flies stirring the ground beneath your feet. Oh, my brother, who will wash your feet, save the sand inside your shoes? Oh, my brother, where is your mother, your father? Who will help me scrape the dried blood that blocks the doorway of your heart? I want to be the water, the sweet oils that rub into the skin of you. I want to hold your bones steady so your mother can identify your face and rub the soft earlobes she's kissed 1,000 times. Oh, my brother, how must we hold your lover who wants a redemption for your skin, who searches for your lips in the dark? Oh, my brother, there is so much blood falling from the sky today, suffocating the light, suffocating the babies. I will guard your roadkill blood. If necessary, I will chew the bullet and digest metallic contradiction. I will be the shovel and the crypt. I will sing your name until the wind lifts it from my tongue and sings your legacy into the 10th degree of sound. I will wail the presence of your history through this throat that is out of rhythm. We be poets, the daughters of your winters and sons of your summers. We be ancient scribes, the architects of your sweat and your tears. My poems will be forever screaming the life of you. I dare the red of the bullet to forget. I dare the killer of you to remember. My words are the acid erasing the crime scene. My words are the softness of all the evidence of ghost hidden beneath your shirt, inside your underwear. Hungry ghost, casting your name into rivers. Oh, my brother, oh, my brother, what are the ancestors singing? Oh, my brother, you don't have to behave in your grave. Oh, my brother, call me, and these lyrics will gather arms and stage your rebellion. The red of the bullet has the poetry of your spirit embedded with indelible ink. Oh, my brother, hear the wail of the red of the bullet. Hear the space between your ribs crumble. Hear the sounds in your chest become a roaring ocean. Hear the butterflies cease flying. Hear this silence that will not be quiet.